Hi everyone. All right, so today the topic is thermal energy transfer. We're going to be talking about this for the next week and a half. This is going to involve some new vocab words, so please make sure that you're taking notes, whether that's in your physical notebook or in an online science journal. All right, first vocab word, thermal conductivity. So go ahead and repeat that word to yourself, that second one especially, conductivity. So thermal conductivity is the ability of a material to transfer heat. So we might say about an object that it has high thermal conductivity or low thermal conductivity. The images here are some objects that have really high thermal conductivity, so we might call them thermal conductors. And basically what this means is an object is able to transfer heat really quickly. So I actually just made some bread in a metal pan, and you can probably imagine that I didn't take that metal pan out of the oven just like with my bare hands, and that's because metal has a really high conductivity. So if I had touched that metal with my bare hands while it was at 500 degrees, I definitely would have gotten a burn because the thermal energy from the pan would have gone straight to my hand really quickly. So metal is one of our best examples of a really high thermal conductivity object. All right, thermal insulation. This is the opposite of thermal conductivity. So thermal insulation is the ability of a material to prevent or slow heat transfer. So some examples of objects that are thermal insulators are rubber, fabric, tinfoil, even though that is metal, paper, wood, wool, and plastic. So if you can probably guess that when I was taking that bread out of the oven in its metal pan, I used a hot pad to touch the metal. So I grabbed it with fabric instead of grabbing the metal directly. And that's because fabric has really high thermal insulation or really low thermal conductivity. So it was safe to grab it that way. All right, conduction. There are three types of heat transfer that we're going to be talking about. So conduction, convection, and radiation are the three types of heat transfer. So this first one, conduction. This is when heat transfers through solids. So for example, when a hand touches ice, that heat transfers out of your hand to the ice. In the example where I was making bread, if I had grabbed the pan, the heat would have transferred from the pan to my hand. And that would be an example of conduction heat transfer because it's a solid to another solid. All right, so you can see this example of somebody grabbing the pan, that would be conduction. And these are convection and radiation. We'll get to those. All right, so the next one is convection. So convection is another type of heat transfer, and this is the heat transfer through gases and liquids. So boiling water moving is an example of convection. The heat is transferring between the water molecules, and they're heating each other up as they are moving. So if you put a pot of water on the stove, right, you see, eventually if it's boiling, you'll see those bubbles rising up and kind of the water moving around in a circle. That's because of convection, this heat transfer through gases and liquids. So you could also see it if you've ever been driving on a really hot day in the summer. Sometimes you'll see you'll kind of see air rising off of the roads. That's convection happening in that air. You can see the example here. They're showing boiling water. So the molecules here are moving because of convection. The heat is transferring from one molecule to the next. All right, and last type of heat transfer, this is radiation. So radiation is much more difficult to describe because it involves some really complicated physics. But there are a couple of things that you can remember about it, and I want you to especially remember the examples that we'll use for radiation. So the definition is that it's heat transfer through electromagnetic waves, and these can travel through empty space. So this is different than the other two because the other two involve solids touching or liquids touching or gases touching. This type of heat transfer can happen through empty space, but it can also happen through objects. So the best example we have of this is the sun's rays warming us, but you could also, microwaves use radiation, radiators use radiation. Basically, all objects give off a little bit of radiation, but there are some examples that we'll use again and again for radiation. So the example here used is this stovetop. This also applies if you have a flame stovetop. All right, so we're going to run through a couple of examples to make this a little bit more clear. So remember, these are the three types of heat transfer: convection, conduction, and radiation. In some of these examples, you'll see that multiple types of heat transfer are happening. That's pretty common in the real world. All right, so you touch a tile floor and your feet get cold. Which one is this? This is conduction because we're talking about two solids touching. Your foot and the floor, those are both solids. Heat transferring is happening there, and it's conduction. All right, so I'll give you a hint on this one. This is actually two different things happening, two of these options. So the first one, this is a radiator, right? We had just talked about that as an example of radiation. That's pretty easy to remember because it has it in the word. So radiation is happening here as the heat comes off of this radiator. But then also you can see that warm air is circulating. Oh, these arrows are actually going backwards. But either way, warm air is circulating. So that's an example of convection as well. Okay, the apartment below yours turns up the heat and hot air rises to your apartment. This also happens on really hot days in the summer. You can tell that the upper apartments are definitely hotter than the lower apartments. This is mainly because of convection. So air is rising, hot air is rising as a result of convection. You put your hands on a warm mug of hot chocolate and you feel the warmth. Keep in mind here that you're putting your hands on the mug itself, not like in the hot chocolate, not the liquid part, just onto the solid mug. So this is another example of conduction because it's two solids. This is a chicken roasting in an oven. So we'll call this radiation. You could also probably say convection here. A lot of ovens, like ovens, will have air circulating in them, right? So we can say convection and radiation here. All right, I think this is the last one. So you warm up outside on a sunny day because of the sun's rays. Remember here, anytime we're talking about the sun and its rays, that's definitely involving at least some radiation because the sun's rays are one of our best examples of radiation. All right, with that, go ahead to the Google form and submit that when you're done. I'll see you in class.